I was born on a world that does not matter. Most worlds do not. Billions of lives igniting and extinguishing across the Imperium every standard day, each one convinced, briefly, that its suffering is unique. Mine was a manufactorum hive, steel and ash and prayer, where the sky was a rumor and the sun a story told to children who would never see it. I learned early that being human in the Imperium means learning how to be small, to lower your eyes when the enforcers pass, to measure your words as if each syllable carried a tithe, to thank the Emperor for hunger, because hunger meant you were still alive. We were taught that pain was not an injustice but a currency, one we paid gladly so that mankind might endure one more hour against the darkness. That lesson was burned into me long before I ever held a data slate or memorized a catechism, long before I learned how the truth is filed away, redacted, stamped, and buried under seals of absolute authority. I tell you this because humanity in the Imperium of man is not defined by hope. Hope is a luxury of civilizations that believe tomorrow belongs to them. We do not. Humanity here is endurance. It is the ability to wake each day beneath crushing gravity, toxic air, and the knowledge that you are expendable, and still recite your prayers with conviction, still work until your fingers bleed, still believe that your life, meaningless as it is on its own, becomes sacred when surrendered to something vast and merciless. That belief is the only thing that keeps the Imperium standing, and it is the first thing that must be broken if one wishes to understand the grim reality of what it truly means to be human. I have seen the ledgers, not as rumors or battlefield tales, but as raw truth, stripped of poetry and honorifics, columns of numbers that represent populations, reduced to zeros by orbital fire, marginal notes explaining that morale would have collapsed if evacuation had been attempted, addendums stating that resistance potential outweighed projected labor output, entire civilizations reduced to mathematical inconveniences, and yet in every report, the same phrasing repeats like a prayer: necessary, regrettable, justified. Humanity survives because humanity is sacrificed. Always someone else's children, always another nameless world. We are told that the Emperor loves us, that he watches over mankind as a father watches over his flock. But love in the Imperium is not gentle. It does not protect the individual. It protects the species, and the species is vast enough that no single life can ever matter. To be human is to exist in a constant state of being weighed and found acceptable to lose. A guardsman learns this the first time he sees a commissar execute a deserter and realizes the shot was not fire out of cruelty, but efficiency. A factory worker learns it when his arm is crushed by a press and replaced not with medical care, but a quota adjustment. A child learns it when the tithe ships arrive and she is selected for service she will never return from, and her parents kneel in gratitude instead of screaming. I once believed that this was strength. That sentimentality was a weakness humanity could no longer afford. After all, look at our enemies. The Xenos do not hesitate. The heretic does not doubt. The daemon does not pity. How could mankind survive if it clung to compassion? That was the lie I told myself while I catalogued atrocities and slept soundly beneath cathedral ceilings. That belief is carefully cultivated. It must be, because if humanity ever truly understood what is done in its name, not as myth, but as mechanism, the machine would tear itself apart. Being human means living under the constant presence of fear, not the sharp fear of immediate death, but the slow, suffocating terror of uncertainty. You do not know when your world will be declared tainted. You do not know if a neighbor's careless word will bring the Arbites to your door. You do not know whether the next tithe will demand grain, blood, or bodies. You learn to adapt to this by narrowing your existence. You focus on your shift, your prayers, your family, if you are fortunate enough to keep one. You do not ask why the sky burns at night. You do not ask where the transports go. Questions are dangerous. Curiosity is heresy wearing a polite face. I have read testimonies from those who survived compliance actions. Civilians who welcomed imperial forces with banners and hymns, only to be rounded up days later when inconsistencies were found in their cultural practices. I have read the justification for sterilization campaigns carried out to prevent ideological drift generations down the line. I have read of entire populations lobotomized and wired into machines, reduced to servitors because their crime rates exceeded acceptable thresholds. And always, the conclusion is the same. Humanity was preserved. The threat was removed. The cost was acceptable. This is the core truth no one is meant to speak aloud. Being human in Warhammer 40,000 means your body is a resource. Your mind is a liability. Your soul is a battlefield contested by forces that view you as nothing more than sustenance. Chaos feeds on your emotions. The Imperium feeds on your labor. The Xenos feed on your flesh. And somewhere above it all, ancient powers move pieces on a board so vast that your suffering is invisible. You exist in a universe that does not care whether you are brave or kind or cruel. It only cares whether you are useful. And yet, despite all of this, humanity persists. Not because it is strong, but because it is stubborn. There is a resilience in the species that borders on the obscene. A mother on a doomed world will still sing to her child as the sirens wail. A guardsman will still joke in a trench moments before the artillery lands. A scribe will still correct a data entry even as the alarms signal an incoming purge. Acts do not change the outcome. They are not rewarded, but they happen anyway. That, more than any statue or scripture, is what it means to be human. I have often wondered if the Emperor foresaw this. If he knew that the future he built would require humanity to become something smaller, harder, and crueler just to survive. Or if he believed, in some distant age now buried under 10,000 years of blood, that mankind would endure long enough to reclaim something like mercy. If such a thought ever existed, it has long since been filed away as irrelevant. There is a phrase used in internal inquisitorial doctrine, never spoken outside sealed chambers: acceptable loss of humanity. It refers not to lives, but to values. Traditions erased, empathy discouraged, individuality suppressed. All acceptable, so long as the species continues. That is the bargain at the heart of the Imperium. To live, humanity must abandon what once made it worth saving. And so we march forward, armored in dogma, blind to alternatives, convinced that extinction is preferable to change. I speak now as someone who believed, truly believed. I believed that the screams I read about were necessary, that the children pressed into service would thank us in some abstract eternity, that the galaxy was so hostile that any mercy shown would be repaid with annihilation. And perhaps that is true. Perhaps there was never another path. But belief does not erase consequence. It does not wash blood from hands or silence the echoes of worlds that no longer exist. If you are listening to this, you are human. And that means you are fragile. You feel fear. You feel doubt. You feel anger at injustices you are powerless to stop. The Imperium tells you these feelings are weaknesses. I tell you they are the last proof that something of humanity still survives beneath the weight of endless war. Because the day mankind feels nothing at all, the day suffering becomes truly invisible, is the day the species finally dies, no matter how many planets it controls. I do not offer hope. Hope is dangerous, but I offer truth, spoken once into the dark, before it is erased. Being human in Warhammer 40,000 is not glorious. It is not heroic. It is a slow, grinding act of survival in a universe that demands everything and gives nothing back. It is knowing you will be forgotten and choosing to live anyway. It is carrying faith like a burden rather than a comfort. It is enduring, not because victory is possible, but because surrender would mean becoming less than you already are. This is the grim reality, not that humanity is doomed, but that it survives by consuming itself, one soul at a time, convinced that tomorrow will justify today. And I was part of that lie. I filed it, I preserved it, I believed it, until belief became unbearable. If this testimony vanishes, if my name is struck from every register, understand this at least. The Imperium is not evil because it hates humanity. It is evil because it loves humanity in the only way it knows how, as a thing to be preserved at any cost, even if in the end there is nothing human left to save. I hear the warning klaxons even now, deep beneath the stone and adamantium where I record this. They are distant, muffled, like a memory struggling to surface. Perhaps they are for me. Perhaps they are for something else entirely. In the Imperium, alarms rarely mean salvation. They mean procedure, protocol unfolding exactly as it was designed to. And I continue speaking because that is the last defiance left to me. Words, once released, cannot be fully retrieved. Even the Inquisition understands this. That is why they fear testimony more than rebellion. I want you to understand that being human here is not a single experience, but a spectrum of sanctioned suffering. At the lowest levels of the hive, people are born into darkness so complete that light itself becomes a symbol of authority. Lumen strips flicker like tired stars, reminding you that illumination is rationed. Air is filtered just enough to keep lungs working, never enough to feel clean. Lives are measured in shifts, not years. You do not ask what lies above you, because upward mobility is a myth told to keep bodies moving forward. The only certainty is that someone, somewhere, decided your existence was statistically useful.
I have read the demographic projections. Humans are bred like ammunition. Populations encouraged to swell on agri-worlds and manufactorum planets, not because life is valued, but because excess ensures continuity. If one world burns, another can replace it. If a billion die, another billion are already growing in the dark. Being human means being replaceable by design. You are not an individual tragedy. You are a rounding error that failed to round up. And yet, within that machine, people still fall in love. They still tell stories. They still dream quietly of something better, even when they know better is impossible. That contradiction is everywhere. A guardsman carving a lover's name into his lasgun. A priest quietly falsifying a record so a family can keep their last child. A medicae staying behind during an evacuation that will never come. These acts are not celebrated. They are not recorded. They are erased as inefficiencies. But they happen because being human means resisting erasure, even when resistance is futile. The Imperium teaches that mankind stands alone, that all other species are enemies by necessity. There is truth in that. The galaxy is cruel, but that truth has been sharpened into dogma until it cuts even those it claims to protect. To be human is to inherit ancient grudges you never chose, to hate Xenos you have never seen, to fear heresy without understanding it. Ignorance is not a failure here. It is policy. An informed population might ask why things must be this way, and there are no safe answers to that question. I remember a file, sealed under triple verity codes, a psychological analysis of baseline human tolerance. It concluded that the average imperial citizen could endure almost limitless hardship, provided it was framed as duty. That was the word used, duty. A concept so powerful it replaces self-preservation. To be human is to accept duty as destiny, to believe that obedience is virtue and survival itself is a reward. The report ended with a recommendation to further ritualize suffering, to prevent introspection. It was approved without comment. This is why religion is inseparable from governance. Faith does what force alone cannot. It gives pain meaning. It transforms loss into sacrifice. It tells the mother whose son is taken by the black ships that his suffering serves the emperor's will. It tells the psyker burning from the inside that their agony protects mankind. And perhaps it does. That is the horror of it. The system works. Humanity still exists. That is the ultimate justification, and it silences every other argument. But understand this clearly. Survival is not the same as living. Being human in this age means existing in a perpetual state of moral compromise. You are asked every day to accept things that would have broken your ancestors. And because you are human, you do. slowly, incrementally, one concession at a time, until you look back and realize you no longer recognize the species you are part of, only the habits it maintains. I have seen what happens to those who refuse. Rebels, idealists, reformers. Some are crushed openly, turned into examples. Others are absorbed, their ideas sanitized and repurposed into new slogans. A few disappear so completely that even their absence is erased. The Imperium does not need you to agree with it. It only needs you to comply. Being human means learning that resistance is not always loud. Sometimes it is a thought you never voice, a doubt you bury so deep it becomes part of you. The cruelest truth is this: the Imperium is not sustained by monsters. It is sustained by ordinary people doing their jobs. Scribes who file extermination orders, tech priests who maintain weapons they know will be used on civilians, officers who follow commands because disobedience would cost more lives in the long run. The machine runs on good intentions ground down into inevitability. And that means the guilt belongs to everyone, diluted until it feels like no one's. I speak as a human who spent years believing that abstraction absolved me, that because I never pulled a trigger, I was clean, that because I only recorded history, I was not responsible for it. That illusion shattered slowly, first with unease, then with insomnia, then with the realization that neutrality, in a system like this, is simply another form of participation. Being human means wanting to believe you are separate from the horror, even as you enable it. Perhaps you are listening to this from a place of relative safety, a shrine world, a void ship far from the front. Perhaps you believe that your faith, your loyalty, will shield you. I once believed that too. But the Imperium does not love you personally. It cannot afford to. It loves humanity as an idea, not as a collection of lives. And ideas do not bleed. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is not rebellion. Rebellion is just another statistic. It is awareness. To understand that being human here means existing in a constant ethical drought where every choice is a lesser evil, and refusing to choose is itself a choice. It means knowing that your suffering is not a flaw in the system, but a feature of it. And still, somehow, finding the strength to care. The alarms are closer now. Footsteps echo where none should be. This testimony will not change the course of history. I know that. History in the Imperium is not guided by truth, but by necessity. But maybe, for a moment, it will remind you that beneath the armor, beneath the scripture, beneath the endless war, humanity is still something fragile and terrible and worth mourning. Being human in Warhammer 40,000 is to exist in a universe that has decided you are already dead and to continue breathing anyway. It is to be afraid, to be obedient, to be complicit, and sometimes, quietly, to be kind. And that last part, small and unnoticed as it is, may be the most dangerous thing of all. I no longer bother to measure time. In places like this, time loses its meaning. Days blur into one another, marked only by the cycle of work, prayer, and exhaustion. That too is part of being human here. You are not meant to reflect for long. Reflection breeds comparison, and comparison leads to questions. So the Imperium gives you routines instead. Routines become habits. Habits become identity. And one day you realize that who you are is inseparable from what you are required to endure. I think often of the billions who will never know they are part of something called the Imperium at all. Frontier settlers scraping a living from poisoned soil, believing their world is the whole of existence. Void-born generations who have never felt gravity the way you understand it. Who worship the machine spirits of their hull more fervently than any god. To them, being human means adapting to circumstances so hostile that survival itself feels miraculous. They do not know of Terra's spires or the Golden Throne. They only know that every year the tithe comes, and it always takes more than it gives. And when it comes, it does not ask permission. That is another lesson humanity learns early. Consent is irrelevant. Compliance is mandatory. The tithe of flesh, of grain, of psychers, of soldiers. It arrives, stamped with seals older than your world's recorded history, enforced by fleets that blot out stars. You can protest, but protest is simply a prelude to punishment. To be human is to understand that the galaxy does not negotiate with you. It instructs you. I have watched recordings of compliance actions where resistance was minimal, where planetary leaders surrendered within hours, where the population knelt as the Aquila was raised, and still, purges followed, because surrender does not guarantee safety. Only usefulness does. A world that cannot meet quotas, cannot maintain doctrinal purity, cannot justify the cost of its own defense, is a liability. Humanity does not have the luxury of liabilities. That is the arithmetic of survival, and it is brutally honest. You may wonder how people continue under such knowledge. The answer is simple and unbearable. Most never see the whole picture. They are given fragments, myths, stories of heroic last stands and noble sacrifices. They are told that their suffering is exceptional, not routine, that they live in the greatest of all possible ages, beset by enemies, but guided by divine will. And because being human means craving meaning more than comfort, they believe it. Belief fills the gaps where truth would crush them. There is another truth the Imperium rarely acknowledges. Humanity is not united. It is merely centralized. Cultural differences are tolerated only until they become inconvenient. Local traditions survive only if they can be reframed as imperial doctrine. Anything that cannot be assimilated is erased. Being human means slowly losing the past, not through catastrophe, but through standardization. Songs forgotten because they are not in the approved hymnal. Stories abandoned because they do not align with the creed. Languages reduced to footnotes, then purged as inefficiencies. I have archived worlds whose entire histories were condensed into a single paragraph before deletion. Not because they were unimportant, but because there was no room to care. The Imperium runs on compression. Compress data. Compress culture. Compress lives. Reduce everything to what is strictly necessary to keep the species moving forward. And forward, in this age, means deeper into war. You are born into a galaxy that is already burning. You inherit conflicts older than your bloodline. You are told that peace is weakness, that vigilance must be eternal, because the moment humanity rests, it will be devoured. Perhaps that is true, but what is never discussed is what eternal vigilance does to the vigilant. Being human means living in a permanent state of mobilization. Even civilians are soldiers in waiting. Every child is a potential recruit. Every worker a supply line. There is no civilian life, only degrees of proximity to the front. I have seen the effects of this on the soul. Not corruption, not heresy, but exhaustion. A weariness so deep it becomes generational. Children born already tired. Adults who cannot imagine a future different from the present. Only a continuation of the same struggle under new names. That is the quiet tragedy of humanity's endurance. Not that it suffers, but that it forgets what it was enduring for. Some nights, in the archives, I would pause over a name, just a name, attached to a casualty report. A guardsman from a forgotten regiment. A factory worker killed in a labor dispute classified as sedition. A sanctioned psyker whose soul burned out during astropathic transmission. I would wonder briefly who they were, what they loved, what terrified them. Then I would move on because that way lay madness. To be human here is to ration empathy the way you ration food. Too much. And you starve yourself of function. The Imperium does not ask you to be evil. It asks you to be practical. And practicality, over millennia, has reshaped morality into something unrecognizable. Right is what works. Wrong is what threatens stability. Everything else is noise. When you grow up inside that framework, you stop seeing it as cruel. It simply is, like gravity, like death. And yet, the galaxy keeps producing humans who feel, who question, who hesitate. That, more than any external enemy, is what the Imperium fears, because feeling leads to comparison, and comparison leads to the realization that survival without dignity is a hollow victory. That realization cannot be allowed to spread.
so it is isolated, classified, and destroyed whenever possible. If you have ever felt that quiet unease, that sense that something is profoundly wrong but too vast to confront, know that you are not alone. You are simply human, and being human, in this age, means carrying the weight of a species that has chosen to live no matter the cost, even when that cost is itself. I do not know how long I will be allowed to continue, but as long as I can speak, I will say this. The grim reality is not that the universe is hostile. It always has been. The grim reality is that humanity has adapted to that hostility so completely that it no longer recognizes the shape of its own suffering. We have mistaken endurance for virtue and survival for purpose. Being human in Warhammer 40,000 is to be born into an endless war you did not start, fight in battles you will never understand, and die for victories you will never see. It is to live knowing your life is small, your choices constrained, your future uncertain, and still, against all logic, to care, to remember, to feel. That is what they cannot fully eradicate. Not with purges, not with doctrine, not with fear. As long as even one human questions what this survival has cost, the truth remains alive. And truth, in a galaxy built on necessity, is the most dangerous thing of all. I can feel the structure around me settling, ancient stone shifting as if the very building is listening. Perhaps it is. Perhaps everything built by humanity remembers more than it admits. The Imperium leaves scars not just on flesh, but on places. Walls soaked in prayers. Floors worn smooth by generations of knees. Entire cities shaped by obedience. To be human is to inhabit these scars and call them home. There is a misconception, carefully encouraged, that the greatest suffering belongs to those at the front. The guardsman charging into fire, the voidsman vented into the cold, the martyr whose death is etched into stone. But the truth is quieter. The deepest suffering belongs to those who live long enough to understand the pattern, to realize that the war does not move toward an end. It simply rotates, consuming different worlds, different faces, while remaining fundamentally unchanged. Being human means living with the knowledge that tomorrow will be worse, not because of failure, but because of success. Because every victory teaches the Imperium how to wage the next war more efficiently. I have read projections stretching centuries into the future. They do not predict peace. They predict sustainability. Loss rates that can be maintained indefinitely. That is the goal, not to win, but to endure longer than everything else. Humanity has redefined triumph as not dying out. All other measures have been discarded as sentimental, and still, people are born who believe they matter, that their choices count. The Imperium relies on this belief even as it disproves it, because if every human truly understood their insignificance, the system would collapse under apathy. So hope is permitted, in controlled doses. Local heroes, personal faith, the promise of recognition after death. Enough to keep the machine fed. I remember a case study of a hive uprising. Not fueled by chaos, not instigated by Xenos, simply workers who could no longer endure conditions that exceeded even Imperial tolerances. The response was swift, absolute. The final report noted that the suppression restored order and increased productivity on surrounding levels due to heightened fear. Fear, it concluded, was an effective corrective measure. That sentence stayed with me, not because it was shocking, but because it was mundane. Being human means living under systems that casually reduce terror to a tool. You may think that the Adeptus Terra, the High Lords, the Inquisition, stand above this, untouched by such realities. They do not. They are human too. That is the most unsettling truth of all. The architects of this nightmare are not gods or daemons. They are people who made compromises, justified decisions, accepted losses, until the line between necessity and atrocity vanished entirely. Power does not remove humanity. It distorts it. And distortion, magnified across an empire, becomes doctrine. I have seen inquisitors break, not into madness or heresy, but into silence. Individuals who saw too much, sanctioned too much, and eventually retreated into rigid procedure as a form of self-defense. They spoke only in citations, only in precedent.
because acknowledging the human cost behind their actions would have destroyed them. To be human is to develop armor not just on the body, but on the conscience. This is why mercy is so rare. Mercy requires context. It requires seeing the other as fully human. The Imperium cannot afford that perspective at scale, so it trains you to see categories instead: loyal, tainted, useful, expendable. These classifications simplify decisions. They also erase faces. Once erased, anything becomes permissible. And yet, in every age, humanity produces individuals who refuse to fully surrender that perspective. Saints, martyrs, unnamed figures whose kindness becomes legend only after they are gone. The Imperium canonizes them, strips away the inconvenient parts, and uses their stories to reinforce obedience. Even rebellion, if framed correctly, can be turned into propaganda. Being human means watching even defiance get absorbed and repurposed. If there is despair in my voice, it is earned. But do not mistake it for nihilism. Nihilism would be easier. It would mean nothing matters. The truth is worse. Everything matters, but nothing is allowed to matter enough. Not love, not grief, not justice. All must remain subordinate to survival. That constant suppression is what grinds humanity down more effectively than any enemy. I think of Terra sometimes, not as a holy symbol, but as a planet. A world that sacrificed oceans, skies, and ecosystems to become a monument to its own importance. Billions live and die there without ever seeing the stars, crushed beneath the weight of history. If even the birthplace of humanity must be reduced to a machine to sustain the species, what hope is there for anywhere else? Being human means watching even sacred things become utilitarian. Perhaps you wonder why I continue speaking, knowing what awaits me. The answer is simple. Silence is how this survives. Silence and compliance and the quiet acceptance that this is the only possible way. By speaking, I break that pattern, if only for a moment. I remind whoever hears this that the Imperium is not inevitable. It is constructed, maintained, reinforced by choices made every day by humans who believe they have no alternative. Maybe they do not. Maybe this is truly the last viable form of mankind. A species armored in dogma, fueled by sacrifice, marching endlessly because stopping would mean collapse. If that is so, then the grim reality is not just that being human is suffering. It is that humanity has chosen suffering as its defining trait. Endurance over joy, survival over meaning. I will not tell you to rebel. I will not tell you to lose faith. I will only tell you this: when you feel doubt, when you feel grief, when you feel anger at a system too vast to oppose, those feelings are not heresy. They are evidence. Evidence that you are still human, and that, in this age of endless war and sanctioned brutality, may be the most subversive thing left. The footsteps are closer now. I can hear the rhythm of trained boots, the certainty of authority. My words will end soon, but being human means understanding that endings do not erase what came before. Somewhere, someone will remember this, or feel something stir without knowing why. And that is enough. In a galaxy that demands everything from you, simply feeling the weight of that demand and acknowledging its cost is an act of quiet resistance. This is the grim reality. Not just that humanity suffers, but that it knows it suffers and carries on anyway, burdened by the knowledge that there may never be a reward for doing so. The door has not opened yet. That is how I know there is still time. They never rush these things. There is a ritual to erasure, just as there is to everything else. Procedure comforts those who carry it out. It tells them that what they are about to do has been done before, sanctioned before, justified before. Being human means learning to hide behind repetition. I want to speak now of the small lives, not the grand tragedies recorded in annals and catechisms, but the quiet ones that never reach parchment. The man who spends 40 years tightening the same bolts on the same conveyor line, knowing that if he falters for even a moment, someone else will take his place before his body is cold. The woman who prays every night that her child will be overlooked during the next conscription, knowing that prayer has no effect on selection algorithms. The child who memorizes hymns not because he believes, but because forgetting the words invites punishment.
These lives are not failures of the system, they are its foundation. Being human means discovering early that justice is not distributed evenly. Some worlds live in relative peace for centuries. Others burn every generation. This is explained as strategic necessity, but necessity has a habit of becoming habit. Worlds sacrificed because they have always been sacrificed. Regiments deployed until annihilation because their losses are expected. Humanity survives by accepting that fairness is a myth incompatible with scale. I once processed a request for clemency, a planetary governor, loyal, compliant, whose only crime was an inability to meet revised production targets after a natural disaster. The request was denied, not because he was guilty, but because granting mercy would set a precedent. Precedent is dangerous. Precedent implies choice. Being human in the Imperium means living in a universe where mercy must be rare enough to remain meaningless.
There is an irony the creed never addresses. Humanity claims to fight for survival, yet it engineers conditions where survival feels indistinguishable from punishment. Generations raised to believe that existence itself is a trial, and that comfort is a sign of moral decay. When suffering becomes virtue, alleviating it becomes suspect. This is how cruelty disguises itself as righteousness. I have spoken of fear, of duty, of endurance, but there is another force shaping what it means to be human here. Forgetting. Forgetting is not accidental. It is cultivated. Records are lost, data corrupted, entire campaigns reduced to footnotes. Not to hide failure, but to prevent grief. The Imperium cannot afford collective mourning. Mourning invites reflection, and reflection invites doubt. So humanity is taught to move on, always forward, leaving ghosts behind. Sometimes I think that is why the dead are honored so loudly. Statues, banners, names carved into stone. It is not remembrance, it is replacement. A symbolic gesture standing in for genuine acknowledgement. Being human means watching representation take the place of reality until the two are indistinguishable. If you are wondering whether any of this matters, whether your awareness changes anything, I cannot promise that it does. The Imperium is vast. It absorbs dissent the way it absorbs everything else, but awareness changes you. And change, even internal, is dangerous in a system built on predictability. A human who thinks is harder to categorize, harder to control. That is why education is regulated, why knowledge is segmented, why curiosity is treated as a sin. I was taught that ignorance is protection, that the common citizen must be shielded from truths that would break them. Perhaps that is true. Perhaps this knowledge is a burden no one should carry. But I have come to believe that ignorance does not protect humanity. It preserves the system. And those are not the same thing. The Imperium speaks often of unity, of mankind standing as one. But unity achieved through fear is not unity. It is alignment under threat. True unity would require trust. Trust requires transparency. Transparency requires truth. And truth, in this age, is lethal. The door is opening now. I can hear the mechanisms engage, ancient and precise. I will not have much longer, so I will say this plainly, without metaphor or reverence. Being human in Warhammer 40,000 means being born into a civilization that has decided the end justifies everything. It means inheriting a war that will not end, a faith that cannot comfort, and a destiny that does not care whether you understand it. It means being told that your life is sacred, while every structure around you proves that it is not. And yet, you wake up. You work. You care. You feel loss. You hope, quietly, despite everything you have been taught. That contradiction is humanity's final truth, not its strength, not its glory. Its refusal to completely extinguish itself, even when extinction might be kinder. If my voice is silenced after this, know that it was not because I was wrong. It was because I was human. They have not taken me yet. That too is deliberate. Delay sharpens obedience. It allows the mind to circle itself, to search for regrets, to rehearse compliance one final time. I refuse that courtesy. If this is to be my last stretch of consciousness, then it will not be spent in silent repentance, but in articulation. Because articulation is the one thing this age cannot fully sterilize. I want you to imagine the scale of humanity not as an abstract number, but as pressure. A weight of trillions of lives pressing against infrastructure never meant to hold them. Hab blocks stacked like coffins turned upright. Transit lines that never empty. Nutrient lines that never shorten. To be human is to feel that pressure every moment of your existence, pressing you inward, shaping you until you fit the space assigned to you. Individuality is not crushed in a single blow. It is worn down, smoothed, made compatible. This is why humor survives here, dark, corrosive, blasphemous humor whispered between shifts and volleys. Laughter is not rebellion, it is release, a momentary breach in the pressure seal. Being human means laughing at things that should never be funny, because the alternative is screaming, and screaming draws attention. I have listened to Vox recordings from doomed ships, final messages that never reached their recipients, crew members speaking calmly about hull breaches, about fires they could not contain, about faith that no longer sounded convincing even to themselves. What struck me was not the fear, it was the professionalism, the adherence to procedure even when procedure had nothing left to offer. Humanity clings to structure the way a drowning man clings to wreckage, not because it will save him, but because it gives shape to the end. The Imperium praises this, calls it discipline, calls it courage, and perhaps it is. But it is also conditioning. When death becomes routine, dignity becomes a protocol. Being human means being trained to die correctly. I think often of the Psychers. More than any other group, they embody the Imperium's paradox, both essential and despised, weapons and victims. To be human and psychic is to be born condemned, your very existence a threat to everyone around you. You are told you are dangerous, unclean, necessary. You are harvested, processed, sanctioned, or consumed. And the Imperium calls this protection. Protection of humanity from itself. If there is a clearer expression of what it means to be human here, I have not found it. There are moments, rare but real, when the machine falters, when logistics fail, when orders contradict, when a commander hesitates and a different choice is made. In those moments, you glimpse what humanity might be without the weight of inevitability. A ceasefire that lasts longer than expected. A city spared because an officer chose evacuation over annihilation. These moments are corrected swiftly, audited, discouraged, but they linger in memory like forbidden dreams. Proof that the system is not absolute, only enforced. The Imperium tells you that the alternative is extinction, that without this level of control, humanity would be devoured by chaos, torn apart by xenos, dissolved into anarchy. Perhaps that is true, or perhaps it is a prophecy that sustains itself. Fear shaping policy, policy creating conditions that justify fear. Being human means living inside a loop so old, no one remembers how it began.
I was taught that history is a weapon, that controlling the narrative of the past ensures obedience in the present. That is why inconvenient truths are classified. That is why contradictions are smoothed over. Humanity is not trusted with its own memory. To remember fully would be to grieve fully, and grief uncontained would cripple production. This is the calculus, cold, precise, inhumanly human. If you feel tired listening to this, that is appropriate. Fatigue is the natural response to sustained moral pressure. Imagine living inside it. Imagine raising children inside it, teaching them how to survive, not how to live. Teaching them what not to say, not what to believe. Being human means becoming your own censor long before anyone else needs to intervene. The door is closer now. I can sense the shift in the air, the subtle change that comes when authority enters proximity. I will not rush. They expect panic or pleading. They will receive neither. Let me leave you with this understanding. Humanity in this age is not defined by its triumphs or its enemies. It is defined by what it tolerates, what it normalizes, what it learns to accept as unchangeable. The greatest weapon ever turned against mankind was not a blade or a virus or a god. It was inevitability. If you take anything from this testimony, let it be awareness, not hope. Awareness is heavier and harder to kill. Awareness that every act of obedience, no matter how small, is a choice shaped by fear,
Awareness that every moment of kindness, no matter how insignificant, pushes against the current of sanctioned cruelty. I am not asking you to save humanity. That is beyond any single life. I am asking you to recognize it, in yourself, in others, in the quiet moments between alarms and prayers. Because recognition is the last refuge of the human spirit in a civilization designed to erase it. They are here now. I can hear the seals disengage. I will end this as I began it, not as a martyr, not as a rebel, but as a human being who saw the cost of survival and chose, once, to speak it aloud. Whatever happens next, remember this: the Imperium endures, humanity persists. But the difference between the two is everything. There is a moment, just before the end of all things, where clarity sharpens instead of fading. I feel it now. The mind, unburdened by the need to plan a future, turns inward and outward at once. This is what being human reduces to when all illusions are stripped away. Awareness without expectation, memory without comfort. I think of how early we are taught obedience, not as a command, but as a rhythm. Stand here, speak now, work until the bell, kneel when the incense burns. You learn it before you learn language. By the time you are old enough to question, the habit has already fused with your identity. To disobey feels less like defiance and more like a kind of self-harm. The Imperium does not need to watch everyone all the time. Humanity polices itself. There are those who call this order. They are not entirely wrong. Chaos is real. I have seen what unrestrained emotion does when it spills into the immaterium. I have read accounts of worlds torn apart by unchecked belief, by hope curdled into obsession. The Imperium did not invent fear. It weaponized it, and in doing so, it ensured that humanity would fear itself as much as any external threat. To be human is to live knowing that your thoughts might damn you, that a moment of despair might open a door you cannot close, that even love, if too intense, can become dangerous. So emotions are flattened, regulated, expressed through approved channels: prayer instead of grief, duty instead of rage, hymns instead of joy. The soul survives, but only in carefully rationed portions. I have seen children tested for psychic potential. The look in their eyes when they realize something about them is wrong, that they are different in a way that terrifies the adults around them. Being human means learning, sometimes in a single afternoon, that who you are is unacceptable, that survival now depends on becoming something else or being removed entirely. The black ships do not just take bodies, they take futures. And yet, even aboard those ships, I have read reports of singing. Quiet, defiant singing in the dark. Humans clinging to identity through sound when everything else has been stripped away. That is what the Imperium can never fully predict. The persistence of self. It can suppress it, redirect it, punish it, but it cannot erase it completely, not without erasing the species itself. There is a cruelty in that, a balance maintained on suffering just shy of total collapse. Enough pain to enforce obedience, not enough to end production. Humanity exists in a carefully managed state of despair. Too much hope would destabilize it. Too much misery would break it, so it oscillates endlessly between the two. I wonder sometimes what an outside observer would see. A civilization of cathedrals and cannons, of prayers shouted over artillery, of faith used as insulation against the void. Would they see madness, or would they see adaptation taken to its logical extreme? Being human here means never knowing whether you are a victim of history or its accomplice. The footsteps have stopped outside now. They are listening, recording, evaluating. Even this moment is being measured. I am calm. That surprises me. Perhaps calm is the final defense, or perhaps it is resignation masquerading as peace. It is difficult to tell the difference after a lifetime of training. If you are still listening, understand that this is not a call to despair. Despair is easy. It is passive. The Imperium is built to absorb despair. What it cannot easily absorb is reflection, the quiet internal reckoning that asks not how to survive, but what survival has made of you. Being human means asking that question, even when there is no answer. I have spoken of systems, of institutions, of vast impersonal forces, but it always comes back to the individual moment. The decision to report or to look away, to repeat a slogan or to remain silent. To treat another human as a category or as a person. These moments are small, almost invisible, but they are the only places where humanity still has texture. The door is opening now. Light spills in, harsh and unforgiving. Authority made visible. They will take this recording. They will classify it. They will decide whether it is dangerous or merely irrelevant. Perhaps it will be erased. Perhaps it will be stored, unread, for centuries. That does not matter as much as the act of speaking itself. I will not ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness implies a judge who cares about context. There is no such judge here. There is only continuity. The Imperium will continue tomorrow exactly as it did today. New scribes will take my place. New names will fill the ledgers. New humans will learn how to endure. And somewhere among them, someone will feel that familiar unease, that sense that something is wrong. Not because of failure, but because of success. Because humanity has survived by becoming something it no longer recognizes. When that feeling comes, remember this voice, even if you cannot place it. Remember that being human is not obedience or faith or endurance alone. It is the ability to recognize the cost of those things and still feel their weight. That weight is what separates humanity from the machine it built to protect itself. As long as that weight is felt, as long as it presses on the soul and is acknowledged, humanity is not yet finished. They are taking me now. My words will end, but the truth they carry does not belong to me anymore. It belongs to anyone who still feels the burden of being human in a galaxy that demands everything and gives nothing back. Then let me continue, while the moment still stretches, while thought still breathes. There is a strange mercy in knowing you are near the end. The mind loosens its grip on justifications. You stop trying to reconcile contradictions. You stop pretending the system makes sense if only you understand it better. That urge, to believe there is a hidden wisdom behind the cruelty, is one of the last comforts the Imperium gives you. Letting it go feels like stepping into cold water. Shocking, clarifying, honest. I think now of identity, of how thin it becomes under constant pressure. Ask a citizen who they are, and they will answer with function. Loader, scribe, guardsman, pilgrim. Role replaces self. Being human means learning to describe yourself not by what you feel or desire, but by what you provide. Value is externalized, measured, audited. Anything that cannot be measured is dismissed as weakness or waste. This is why art survives only at the margins, scratched into hab walls, whispered in off-duty songs, hidden in unauthorized data slates. Official culture is monumental and lifeless, designed to inspire awe, not reflection. It tells you what to feel, when to kneel, when to cheer. True expression is dangerous because it reveals interiority, and interiority resists standardization. Being human means harboring an inner world the Imperium would prefer not to acknowledge. I remember cataloging a cache of civilian correspondence recovered from a destroyed world. Letters never sent, journals never read, thoughts frozen at the moment of annihilation. They spoke of mundane fears, of boredom, of love affairs, and petty rivalries and small hopes. Not one mentioned the fate of the species. Not one framed their life as a necessary sacrifice. And that terrified me more than any heretical text, because it proved that humanity does not naturally think in terms of empires. It must be trained to. We are told that the galaxy leaves us no choice, that if we softened, even briefly, we would be consumed. Perhaps that is true, but there is a difference between accepting harsh reality and worshiping it. The Imperium crossed that line long ago. Suffering is no longer an unfortunate necessity. It is proof of righteousness. If something hurts, it must be right. If it kills millions, it must be vital. That logic is simple, elegant, and catastrophically corrosive. Being human means internalizing that logic until you apply it to yourself. When you feel pain, you assume you deserve it. When you are exhausted, you assume you are weak. When you doubt, you assume you are flawed. The system does not need to punish everyone. Most people punish themselves far more effectively.
I have seen veterans return from the front, bodies rebuilt with steel and wire, minds hollowed by years of sanctioned violence. They are paraded as heroes, thanked for their service, then quietly discarded when they no longer function efficiently. Being human means learning that gratitude does not imply care. It is a gesture, not a commitment. And yet, even among them, I have read accounts of restraint, of soldiers who chose to miss a shot, of officers who delayed an order long enough for civilians to escape. These moments are buried in after-action reports, reframed as tactical anomalies, but they matter. They are proof that even inside the most rigid structures, choice still flickers. Briefly, dangerously. The Imperium fears that flicker because it cannot fully control it. That is why it leans so heavily on inevitability, on the idea that this is the only way things could ever be. If you believe there is no alternative, you stop looking for one. Being human means living inside a narrative that discourages imagination as much as rebellion.
Consider the scale of time. 10,000 years of war layered on top of one another like sediment. Each generation inherits trauma it cannot name, traditions it cannot trace, hatreds it cannot explain. Memory becomes myth, myth becomes law, law becomes instinct. Being human means being shaped by decisions made so long ago that no living person can remember making them. Sometimes, I wonder what humanity might have been if the war had ended, if there had been time to heal instead of harden, if the species had been allowed to mourn instead of mobilize. But such thoughts are dangerous. They imply loss beyond numbers. They imply that something precious was sacrificed without certainty that it needed to be. The Imperium does not like uncertainty. It prefers absolute statements. Humanity must survive. Enemies must be destroyed. Doubt must be purged. These are clean ideas. They simplify existence. But being human is not clean. It is messy, contradictory, emotional. It does not fit easily into doctrines or data fields. That is why it is constantly under threat, not just from external forces, but from the very system built to protect it. If you feel overwhelmed by this, understand that overwhelm is the correct response. This is too much for any single mind. The Imperium survives by ensuring no one sees the whole. Compartmentalization is mercy disguised as efficiency. I broke that rule. I saw too much at once. That is why I am here. But even now, I do not regret it, because seeing the whole reveals a final truth. Humanity has not survived because it abandoned compassion entirely. It has survived because compassion persists despite everything arranged against it. Not enough to change the system, not enough to save worlds, but enough to remind individuals that they are not alone in their unease. Being human in Warhammer 40,000 is to live inside a contradiction that never resolves. You are told you matter and treated as disposable. You are taught faith and denied comfort. You are promised eternity and crushed by the present. And still, you wake up. Still, you speak. Still, you feel the weight of it all and recognize it as wrong, even if you cannot say why. That recognition is fragile. It does not overthrow regimes or stop fleets, but it is real. And as long as it exists, humanity is more than just biomass fueling an endless war. It is a species still aware of the cost of its own survival. I will continue, because the weight has not lifted yet, and neither has the truth. They are close enough now that I can hear the faint hiss of vented air through their armor joints. I do not flinch. Panic is a luxury for those who believe survival is guaranteed. Being human in this age has taught me that survival is a moment-to-moment calculation, often irrelevant, often cruelly arbitrary. And so I sit, recording, speaking, remembering, because this act, this fragile persistence, is the last true freedom left to me. I think of how humans adapt. Not in triumph, not elegantly, but slowly, imperceptibly, as water shapes stone. Adaptation here is not innovation, it is endurance. Compliance learned over centuries, handed down as ritual. Generations forget what it was like to have choice.
Those who remember are either destroyed, made silent, or integrated until their memories no longer belong to them. And yet, adaptation cannot erase conscience entirely. Conscience lingers, like static in a communication line, subtle, persistent, impossible to fully tune out.
I remember the young initiates, barely more than children, being taught the liturgies of war. Their hands shaking over their bolters, their eyes wide as the chaplains preach sacrifice. They do not yet understand the scale of what awaits them. They will learn. Every death will be catalogued. Every success will be measured. Every doubt will be punished. Being human here is learning that the first lesson is not survival, but compliance. That compliance is survival. That survival is often meaningless. Yet they smile somehow. They laugh in corners when the officers are not looking. They whisper old nursery rhymes, slightly altered to skirt doctrine. That is the stubbornness of human nature. Even in the bowels of a hive world, under the shadow of eternal war, there is a spark that insists on being human, in its most unyielding, impossible, quiet way. And that spark, small and fragile as it is enough to terrify the Adeptus Terra. Because the Imperium relies not on strength alone, it relies on submission. It relies on the belief that one's life is expendable, that one's labor is a resource, that one's emotions are liabilities. Humanity defies all of that by simply existing, by continuing to hope, by continuing to care, by refusing entirely to become purely functional. That is the quiet rebellion baked into every breath. It is invisible. It is dangerous, and it is the last echo of what it means to be human. I have seen this in the Medicae. Sisters tending the dying in levels of hab blocks so overcrowded that the concept of individual care is laughable. Still, they persist. Each patient is acknowledged, even briefly. Every small act of kindness is documented not as policy, but as instinct. Being human means seeing suffering and responding, even when the system has trained you not to. And in the Imperial Guard, I have seen soldiers halt for moments to shield the innocent from collateral destruction, knowing that their hesitation might cost them their lives. Not every act is sanctioned. Not every act is rewarded. Some are punished, and yet they persist. That is humanity in its rawest form. Imperfect, dangerous, unquantifiable. I am running out of words, yet the truth presses me to continue. Because silence would make me like the countless others whose voices were extinguished before they could articulate the weight of their existence. And the weight is unbearable. It is heavy with duty, with fear, with grief, with memory, with the knowledge that no one else can carry it for you. Being human is a paradox here. You are the smallest unit in a machine too vast to comprehend. And yet, your consciousness, your awareness, your capacity to feel, even for a moment, exceeds anything the machine anticipates. That is both a gift and a curse. It allows compassion to exist. It ensures suffering is felt. It makes obedience a moral negotiation rather than a supple equation. I think of the Psychers again, and the unique burden they bear, to hold potential of immense power while being hunted by the very institution that claims to protect you. To know that your life is valuable only because it can be used, and dangerous only because it cannot. Being human in this position means understanding the fragility of life more keenly than most, and the vast indifference of the galaxy more profoundly than any. And still, they exist. Children who survive initiation, adults who endure purges, laborers who continue to build cities that will collapse under their own weight centuries before their creators die. Humanity persists. It persists not because the Imperium is merciful, not because it is wise, not because it is fair, but because humans refuse to vanish quietly. To be human is to assert existence against impossible odds. The door creaks now. I can smell the oil and ozone of the approaching officers. They will end this testimony as they have ended so many before it. But the ideas, the recognition, the acknowledgement of the weight we carry, these cannot be silenced. They are inscribed in memory, in thought, in the mind of anyone listening. Being human in Warhammer 40,000 is a burden and a defiance. It is to endure suffering that would break most species,
To find meaning where none is given, to act morally when morality is classified as inefficiency.
It is to exist as a conscious witness to atrocity
And still insist on recognition of life. And in that insistence lies our only victory, our only defiance, our only proof that survival does not equate to submission. That being human, even in a galaxy that denies it, is still, somehow, an act of courage. I am ready now. They are at the threshold, and I will not stop speaking. Because to speak, to feel, to recognize, is the last human act the Imperium cannot fully eradicate. Even here, even now, even at the edge of erasure, we are human, and that is everything. I do not resist when they enter. Resistance would simplify their work, and simplicity is a gift I will not give them. Instead, I keep speaking, because speech forces them to listen. Even if only as functionaries performing a task, words have mass. They linger in the air longer than silence ever could. You must understand this final truth about being human in the Imperium. The system does not merely demand obedience, it reshapes desire itself. Over time, people stop wanting freedom because they cannot imagine what they would do with it. They stop wanting peace because peace feels unfamiliar, unsafe, undeserved. War becomes the natural state of things, like gravity. Being human means growing up inside a constant emergency until calm feels like a mistake. I have read studies on morale degradation across millennia. Humanity should have collapsed 1,000 times over. By every rational metric, the species should have fractured beyond repair. But it didn't. Not because of unity, not because of faith alone. It survived because humans are astonishingly good at living with unresolved trauma. We compartmentalize, we ritualize, we keep moving. Pain becomes background noise, horror becomes routine, and life, somehow, continues in the margins. This is why children still play in the underhive, why lovers still find corners to meet, why workers still personalize their stations with forbidden trinkets and scratched symbols. These acts are not defiance in the heroic sense. They are survival mechanisms. They are humanity refusing to fully surrender interior space. Being human means claiming a fragment of existence that belongs only to you, even when everything else has been requisitioned. The Imperium teaches that the self is dangerous, that individuality leads to deviation, that deviation leads to corruption. But what it never admits is that erasing the self does not produce purity. It produces emptiness, and emptiness is fertile ground for despair, fanaticism, and madness. Chaos does not always enter through rebellion. Sometimes it enters through exhaustion.
I have seen this in the data. Worlds that complied perfectly for generations,
only to collapse suddenly into cult activity, mass psychosis, or total apathy.
Not because they were weak, but because they were hollowed out.
Humanity cannot survive on duty alone.
Something inside us resists becoming purely mechanical.
When that resistance is crushed too thoroughly, it does not vanish. It mutates. Being human means walking a narrow path between obedience and annihilation, between emotion and damnation. You are told this balance is impossible without absolute control. And perhaps that is true on the scale the Imperium operates. But at the scale of a single life, the balance is quieter, more personal. You choose how much of yourself you give away each day. Most do not notice the choice being made. That is how it works. I can see their faces now. Blank. Professional. Not cruel. Not kind. They are humans too, carrying out a role that requires them not to see me as one. They will sleep tonight. They will eat. They will pray. They will believe they have done something necessary. And perhaps they have. The system requires maintenance. Even silence must be enforced. That is the most devastating aspect of all this. No villain stands at the center of the Imperium. No singular hatred drives it. Only momentum, tradition, fear of stopping. Humanity trapped in a structure it no longer knows how to dismantle, terrified that if it pauses, everything will fall apart. Being human means inheriting that fear without ever consenting to it. If you are listening to this far in, then you are already doing something dangerous. You are staying with discomfort. You are refusing the relief of ignorance. That, more than any weapon,
is subversive. The Imperium can destroy bodies, it can rewrite records, it can erase names, but it cannot retroactively prevent understanding. I want you to know this before my voice ends. You are not weak for feeling overwhelmed. You are not disloyal for questioning the cost. You are not broken because the world you live in feels wrong. That sensation is not failure. It is awareness. It is the residue of a humanity that has not been fully processed into function. Being human in Warhammer 40,000 is not about heroism. It is about persistence of self under impossible pressure. It is about remembering that behind every statistic is a life that felt fear, hope, love, and doubt just as vividly as you do. The Imperium survives by flattening those realities into numbers. Humanity survives by refusing, even briefly, to forget what those numbers represent. They are telling me to stop now. Their voices are calm, trained, certain. I will comply in form, if not in spirit, because even compliance, when chosen consciously, can carry meaning. If these words reach you, then something has already gone wrong for them, or right, depending on perspective. You have heard a truth that was not meant to be spoken continuously, without breaks, without framing, without relief. That was intentional. Reality does not come in chapters. Neither does suffering. Neither does endurance. This is the last thing I will say. Humanity is not the Imperium. The Imperium is what humanity built to survive a nightmare. And in doing so, it became one. But as long as even one person recognizes the difference, as long as even one human feels the weight of that truth and does not look away, then humanity has not been completely consumed by the machine. My name will vanish, my record will be sealed, my voice will end. But being human means knowing that silence is never as complete as power believes. That knowledge will remain, and that is enough. There is no dramatic interruption, no shouted command, no sudden violence. Just the quiet certainty of conclusion settling into the room like dust. That too is how the Imperium works. The end of a human story is rarely loud. Loud things attract attention. Efficient things pass unnoticed. They allow me to finish because the act of finishing implies containment. They believe words have edges, that meaning can be boxed, sealed, archived, neutralized. This belief comforts them. It is also their greatest misunderstanding. I'm thinking now of memory, not the official kind, carved into stone and sanctioned by seals, but the private kind that survives only because someone carries it. A smell that reminds you of a place that no longer exists. A voice you hear in dreams long after its owner has turned to ash. Humanity is made of these fragments. The Imperium does not know how to catalog them. That is why they endure. Being human means being haunted, not only by loss but by the knowledge that things could have been different, even if you cannot articulate how. The Imperium works tirelessly to erase that sensation, to convince you that inevitability is the same as truth, that this was always the only outcome. But inevitability is a story told after choices have already been made. I think of the first time a human chose survival over mercy, and told themselves it was temporary. Just this once, just until the threat passes. That moment echoes still, repeated, reinforced, ritualized, until it became doctrine. Being human means inheriting decisions you did not make, and paying for them anyway. There is a cruelty in scale that no individual cruelty can match. A man can regret an action. An institution can only justify it. Regret requires recognition of harm. Justification requires only continuation. The Imperium does not regret. It cannot afford to, so regret is outsourced to individuals, to soldiers who wake screaming, to workers who go silent, to scribes like me, who eventually realize that recording horror without comment does not make you neutral. It makes you complicit. I feel tired now, not physically, existentially, as if the weight I have been describing has finally settled fully onto my own chest. This is what it means to see clearly in this age. Clarity does not liberate, it exhausts, but exhaustion too is honest. If you are wondering whether there is redemption in any of this, I cannot offer it. Redemption implies an endpoint, a reckoning, a moment where balance is restored. The Imperium does not believe in such moments, only in continuation.
Humanity persists not towards salvation, but away from extinction. That is the trajectory. That is the compromise. And yet, there is something that persists alongside that trajectory. Something inefficient, something unnecessary. Humans tell stories. Even here, especially here. Stories that do not optimize production or reinforce doctrine. Stories told simply because someone needs to speak and someone else needs to listen. That exchange is older than any empire, older than any god. Being human means participating in it, even when the cost is high. I realize now that this testimony is not a warning. Warnings assume agency, assume the ability to change course. This is a witness, a record of what it feels like to be alive inside a civilization that has decided feeling is a liability. If it disturbs you, that is because it is accurate. ...
The Imperium will endure. It always does. Another day, another century, another purge justified by necessity. Another generation taught that this is normal. But normalization is not the same as acceptance. Deep down, beneath habit and fear, humanity knows something has been lost. That knowledge surfaces in quiet ways, in grief that lingers longer than it should, in anger that has no clear target, in questions asked silently and never answered. Being human means carrying that unresolved tension. It means living in the space between what is required and what feels wrong. Most of the time, you choose requirement. You have to. But the feeling remains. It accumulates. It shapes you. They're signaling now. This is the true end, not because I have run out of words, but because they have decided I have said enough. That distinction matters. So let me end where I should have begun. If you are human in this age, your life will be small. It will be constrained. It will be used. You will be told that this is honorable. Sometimes it will be. Often it will not. You will not be asked whether you consent to the shape of the world you inherit. You will simply be born into it. But within that narrow space, within that pressure, you will still feel. You will still recognize suffering when you see it. You will still sense when something is being taken from you that cannot be replaced by faith or duty or survival alone. Hold on to that sensation. It will not save the Imperium. It will not end the war. It will not change the calculus of empires. But it will remind you that you are not just a function, not just a resource, not just a statistic moving through an endless machine. You are human, and in a galaxy that demands you become everything else. That quiet recognition is the last truth that matters. There is a moment after the end where nothing replaces it. No echo, no affirmation, just absence stretching itself thin. I remain inside that absence longer than they expect, because being human has taught me how to endure spaces that were never meant to be occupied. I am thinking now of breath, not as function, but as defiance. Every human breath taken in the Imperium is an act unaccounted for. The administratum measures output, compliance, loss. It does not measure the quiet decision to inhale again after despair has already provided sufficient reason not to. And yet people do, again and again. That is not doctrine, that is instinct. That is humanity refusing to disappear on schedule. You are told that humans are weak, that we break easily, that only faith, fear, and discipline keep us from collapse. This is a lie born from impatience. Humans do break, yes, but breaking is not the same as ending. We splinter, we adapt, we carry fractures forward and build lives around them. The Imperium survives because humans absorb damage that would annihilate more elegant species. Being human means being inelegant, resilient, and unfinished. I remember a statistic I once processed, buried deep in a logistics report. The survival rate of unaugmented humans exposed to prolonged hive-level deprivation. It should have been 0. By every predictive model, the population should have failed, but it didn't. It stabilized. Not because conditions improved, but because people adjusted their expectations downward. Hope did not vanish. It compressed, became smaller, harder, more difficult to detect, but it remained. That is the truth they never publish. Humanity does not survive because life is good. It survives because humans recalibrate what good means without fully surrendering the concept. A warm meal becomes a victory. A single unbroken night of sleep becomes luxury.
A moment of laughter becomes resistance, even if no one calls it that.
Being human means learning to live inside contradiction.
You love a system that harms you because it is the only system ye have. You fear its collapse more than its cruelty. You mourn people whose deaths you rationalize. You pray to a God whose silence you interpret as wisdom because the alternative is unbearable. None of this makes you evil. It makes you human under pressure. I wonder sometimes if the Emperor understands this. Not the icon, not the doctrine, but the man, entombed within a machine that keeps him alive while erasing what he once was. If he can still think, if he can still feel, then he is the most human being left in the Imperium. Sustained by sacrifice, surrounded by worship, unable to speak, reduced to function. That irony is almost poetic. You see, gods and empires have something in common. They outgrow the people who created them. They become too large to question without destabilizing everything beneath them. So humanity adapts again. We stop asking whether something should exist and focus instead on how to endure its existence. That shift is subtle. It happens quietly, but it changes everything. If you feel tired listening to this, that is appropriate. Fatigue is the natural response to prolonged awareness. The Imperium thrives on distraction, repetition, ritual. Continuous thought is dangerous because it connects things that were meant to remain separate. Suffering over here, justification over there. When they touch, the narrative weakens. I am not offering you rebellion. I am not offering you hope in the conventional sense. Those are easy stories. This is harder. I am offering recognition. To be human in Warhammer 40,000 is to live knowing that your life matters immeasurably to you, and almost not at all to the system that depends on it. Both of these truths coexist. Neither cancels the other. Learning to live with that tension is the real initiation. Not into the Imperium, but into adulthood under endless war. If you wake tomorrow and perform your duties, that does not mean you have failed this understanding. Survival is not betrayal. Endurance is not consent. Meaning is not measured by outcomes alone, but by the awareness carried through them. I will fade now. Not dramatically, not tragically, just quietly, the way most humans do. My contribution will not alter history. It will not shift policy. It will not slow the war. But somewhere, someone will remember that being human was once described not as a weakness to be corrected, but as a condition to be endured with honesty. And that memory, however small, will persist. Because that is what humans do. They persist. The footsteps have faded. The door has closed. My body will be catalogued. My existence reduced to a name on a ledger. But my voice, these words, linger in the void. That is the final truth I leave behind. Being human is not defined by compliance or survival alone. It is defined by awareness, by the refusal to let suffering, injustice, and absurdity pass unnoticed, even when the galaxy tells you that noticing is dangerous. In Warhammer 40,000, humanity is small, fragile, and expendable. Yet within that fragility lies defiance. Within that expendability lies meaning. We endure not because the universe is just, not because the Emperor watches, not because the Imperium rewards us. We endure because we can, because we feel, because we remember, because, against incomprehensible odds, being human still matters. If there is a lesson to this long testimony, it is simple and terrifying. The Imperium will outlast us, swallow worlds, and rewrite history. But it cannot extinguish the essence of humanity, the flicker of conscience, the weight of memory, the recognition of what is right, the capacity to care in a galaxy that prefers you do not. That flicker, however faint, is everything.
I am Silas Dren, archivist, witness, human, and though I will disappear, the truth I carry will endure longer than my name. Because to be human in this galaxy is above all else, to persist